Yes, sir, your voice is clear, sir.
Right. Andarki Namaskaram and a very good evening to everyone and welcome to the 29th in the series of AP Kovinar. We all know that now mucormycosis cases are increasing and it needs a multidisciplinary approach. So in this Kovinar, we are going to bring you speakers from three different specialities who are going to speak about a multidisciplinary approach for mucormycosis. AP Kovinar is a flagship capacity building program of Government of Andhra Pradesh for all the COVID hospitals and doctors who are practicing COVID. This is to enhance their knowledge and make them confident to respond to various cases and hence reduce mortality due to COVID-19. Today, I am joined by the moderator of today's program, Dr. P.V. Sudhakar, and along with him, there are three speakers from three different specialties. So before that, I request all of you to kindly attend with preferably video on. I request the speakers to check your audio and video. I was just checking that they had already checked. However, Dr. Udaya's voice is not clear. Doctor, I request you to log out and log in again and use earphones so that your voice is coming through clearly. Because sometimes it's maybe because of the device. So I request speakers to keep your PPTs ready. If your PPTs are not getting displayed as you are checking, please share it to our moderator or the technical support who contacted you just before the webinar started so that they can share it on your behalf. I request all the participants not to write or share anything on the screen unless told. And we request you to attend with your actual name, which you gave while registering, so that we can generate certificates of your participation and we can send it across to you. This is specifically for the hospitals which are notified for mucormycosis. If any of your colleagues want to join, kindly ensure that you're sending the link through which you joined so that they can join this immediately. Let me now welcome our moderator, Dr. P.V. Sudhakar. Doctor is a professor and head of the Department of Plastic Surgery and Principal Dean of Andhra Medical College, Visakhapatnam. The former Superintendent of KGH Visakhapatnam, Chairman Board of Studies, Dr. NTR University of Health Sciences, Member Specialist Board, National Board of Examination, and former Director, Vishaka Institute of Medical Sciences. The former member and in charge chairman of AP Medical Council as well. He did his MBBS from Andhra Medical College, MS Surgery, MCH Plastic Surgery, and DNB Plastic Surgery, all from prestigious PGIMER Chandigarh. He is a recipient of various awards, which include Award for Outstanding Services by District Collector for 8 times PSCF International Scholar Award of American Society of Plastic Surgeons, R.G. Saraya International Fellowship of Association of Plastic Surgeons of India, received State Best Teacher Award of Government of Andhra Pradesh from the then Honorable Chief Minister Dr. Y.S. Rajsekhar Reddy in 2007. He has delivered many orations of IMA and Association of Surgeons of India. He is a recipient of Rupa Shilpi and Seva Brahma Awards. I welcome Dr. P.V. Sudhakar and I request him to take over the webinar from here. Over to you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, sir, for your kind introduction. And before we start, I request all the participants in this particular webinar to mute your systems, number one. Number two, like our sir has said so just now, please log in with your own names. Number three, when you put your questions in the chat box, please do not give your attendance in that. Please do not give the compliments to the speaker in your chat box. Only the chat box is reserved for the questions that you have, if any. And let's start the proceedings. As you friends, as you all know, that the mucormycosis has become very rampant these days. It has been estimated that we have about 10,000 cases in the entire country, and we have about 1,000 cases in our own state. And apart from this, it has been observed that this has become very common in the post-COVID patients alone. Though many people have attributed the increased blood sugar levels, the uncontrolled diabetes, the excessive usage of steroids and usage of certain other drugs, but there have been contrary reports as well, that people who are not diabetics getting this particular infection, people who have got an absolute control of diabetes getting this particular infection, and people who have got diabetes but non-COVID patients also having this infection. And similarly, people who have been using steroids for various other ailments also are not getting this infection as we expect them to have. And so the entire reason for this particular program is to throw light as not only at the individual experiences, but also to stimulate people to conduct studies and to understand why it is happening now, why it is related to COVID, how it is related to COVID, and lot of epidemiological data needs to be collected, and it's the responsibility of each one of us not only to treat the patients once they are suffering, but also to prevent. In order to prevent, we need to know the reason why it is happening. So to collect the epidemiological data and to aid in the progress of the science, it is our duty, bounded duty, to study the epidemiological data as well. And let us all come out with more data so that we will know as to the reason for its occurrence and the best practices that we all have every day in and day out, so that others can learn and they can practice. We all know that ours is a resource constrained society, and under these circumstances it's our duty to see that we provide the best possible treatment with the limited available resources. So I have a wonderful panel today of experts who are going to talk to us of the multidisciplinary approach. Like we have been doing for the last 1 week or so, we have been operating on many patients, we have been treating many patients, and we have already realized the need for the multidisciplinary approach here. So in order to have a good understanding of what are the different specialities that are involved in this particular management, and how we can come together in order to reduce the morbidity and mortality of these patients, in order to give more chances of them to live. As you are all aware, so the Western world has reported 60% deaths following the mucormycosis in cancer patients. So there are reports of high mortality, and we all should strive hard to see that our mortality is put to as minimum as possible. Today we have three speakers with us. Dr. N.V. Sundarachari, who is a neurologist and the professor and head of the Department of Neurology at Guntur Medical College and Guntur General Hospital. He is a very active member in the State COVID Control Command Center, and a great thinker, and he always looks forward for better solutions within the resources that we have. And later we have Dr. Rohan Deshpande, an MDS, a oral and maxillofacial surgeon. He is a consultant maxillofacial surgeon at Nagpur, and a budding ENT surgeon. Though he has 10 years of experience in ENT, he has been doing a lot of endoscopic sinus surgeries. I'm sure that he is going to show some of them to us today. And he is an ENT surgeon from Rajahmundry, and we have all these three speakers who are going to deliver their lectures initially and later be available for the questions and answers. And I request people to, all the participants, to post your questions in the chat box so that we can take them up one by one. And if possible, we will allow some questions by the individuals also. And over to you, Dr. Sundarachari, for your presentation, and be available for the questions later. Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening, all the participants who have joined this webinar. I welcome you all. This is one of the webinars among mucormycosis series. This has been conducted by the government of Andhra Pradesh. And I am very much grateful to Dr. Vinod sir for giving me this opportunity. And I thank Dr. Sudhakar Garu, the moderator of today's webinar on mucormycosis. I've been working as a professor of neurology for the last 20 years in Government General Hospital, Guntur. and have been working as special officer for the COVID command control room for the last 1 year. Today's topic is mucormycosis. As you all know, it is occurring in epidemic proportions among the COVID pandemic. The reasons are still not known. And the topic interested to me is mucormycosis, a multifaceted, a multidisciplinary approach. Why it is crucial, why it is very important. The reason is very simple. If you know the biology, pathobiology of mucormycosis, if you know the etiology of mucormycosis, if you know the clinical features of mucormycosis, one need not answer this question. It is definitely a multi-system, a multidisciplinary condition, and it requires the aggressive intervention of multiple disciplines. So, to understand mucormycosis, one should listen to the webinars again and again. We have been conducting these webinars for the last 1 month on COVID. The first slide, please. A brief introduction. See, India is the capital of mucormycosis. COVID has affected maximum number of people in America, followed by India. And China is having the highest number of diabetics, followed by India. But mucormycosis is most common in India. It is not common in America. It is uncommon in China also. See, mucormycosis is a life-threatening infection caused by the fungi of the order Mucorales. This mucormycosis is also termed zygomycosis by some sources, but this term zygomycosis has been abandoned by the recent classification of fungi. Mucormycosis is highly invasive. It is relentlessly progressive, and the mortality and morbidity is around 50 to 70%. Mucormycosis, an aggressive, acute onset, fatal disorder, and among the order of Mucorales, there are so many species. The most common is the Rhizopus oryzae, followed by.
Please change your slides, Dr. Sundarachari. Keep changing your slides.
Okay, sir. It is shared to the moderator.
Sundarachari sir, I am sharing.
Sir, operator.
Sir, నేను షేర్ చేస్తున్నాను సార్, మీరు చెప్తే నేను మారుస్తాను.
Please.
You can say next slide, okay. Sundarachari.
Okay, sir. The Rhizopus oryzae is the most common cause of mucormycosis, and the Mucorales are ubiquitous fungi, and humans are constantly exposed to this spores. The true incidence of mucormycosis is not known. It is underestimated because of difficulties in antemortem diagnosis. Next slide. Mucormycosis is predisposed by many risk factors. Some of them are hematological malignancies, hematopoietic stem cell transplantation, solid organ transplantation, poorly controlled diabetes mellitus, steroids, chronic acidemia, COVID-19 itself, hyperferritinemia, cytokine storm, lymphopenia, neutropenia, and drugs such as voriconazole, which has no antimicrobial activity. In addition to these risk factors, burns, chronic debilitating states, prematurity, trauma are the other risk factors predisposing to mucormycosis. Next slide. See, these mucorales species are saprophytic, which means they live on dead and dying, decaying organic substrates. These fungi are rapidly growing, and the hallmark of mucormycosis is angioinvasion resulting in infarction and necrosis of surrounding tissue. See, this can be proliferated. It enters into the host by inhalation, by ingestion, or cutaneous inoculation. These are the three major modes of transmission. Inhalation of spores is the most common route of entry. We all inhale spores of mucormycosis, but our immunity prevents the germination of spores. So, host immunity in a healthy individual prevents germination of fungal spores. And these spores must overcome both innate and adaptive immune responses to establish invasive infection. Funny, next slide. See, what is the reason for this proliferation of these spores? Coming to this is pathobiology. This can be understood better by knowing the pathobiology of mucormycosis. A defect in phagocytic activity caused by neutropenia, a functional defect caused by glucocorticoids, hyperglycemia, and acidosis. These glucocorticoids, hyperglycemia, and acidosis, they cause unimpeded proliferation of fungi. See, mucormycosis is often disseminated in a severely immunosuppressive individual also. But you may ask me why it is not seen in AIDS. But in AIDS, the lymphopenia may not be as critical as AIDS. That's why in AIDS, the disseminated mucormycosis is uncommon because lymphopenia is not critical in these patients. Another important predisposing biochemical factor is the free iron. The free iron is an essential predisposing factor for patients with mucormycosis. The iron overload with ketoacidosis lead to such infections. Historically, poorly controlled diabetes mellitus has been a major predisposing factor reported in about 36 to 88% of all cases of mucormycosis. As a neurologist, I have seen many cases of mucormycosis in my practice, but before the COVID, all these patients were diabetics, all these patients were having ketoacidosis. So why this mucormycosis is occurring in epidemic proportions in this post-COVID or during COVID? The answer to be still found out. Diabetic patients with ketoacidosis are susceptible to mucormycosis. Next slide, please. See, a normal human serum cannot support the growth of Rhizopus oryzae, whereas a serum in diabetic patient can do it. That means in diabetic, the acidosis interrupts the normal inhibitory activity of serum by attenuating the ability of the transferrin to bind iron from the fungus. See, this fungus strives on iron. So there is no way for the transferrin to bind to the iron of the fungus. So that's why the fungus strives in acidosis medium. The quantitative and qualitative neutrophil and phagocytic cell dysfunction occurs in diabetic patients with ketoacidosis, and it plays an important role in the pathogenesis of mucormycosis. Next slide. Coming to the clinical manifestations, a number of symptoms occur in mucormycosis. Depending on the symptom complex, mucormycosis can be grouped into 6 categories. The most important one is rhinoorbital or rhinocerebral mucormycosis. This is the characteristic presentation in patients with diabetic ketoacidosis. This rhinocerebral mucormycosis, what we are concerned now, the early signs and symptoms are from the sinus invasion, and the sinusitis, because of other causes, may be indistinguishable from the symptoms of mucormycosis. So the early signs and symptoms of sinus invasion may be difficult to distinguish from common causes of sinusitis. So as you all know, pain in the sinus region, congestion of the sinus region, headache, mouth pain, some otological symptoms like ear pain, ear discharge are the common symptoms of rhinocynomycormycosis. And there can be hyposmia and anosmia also. And the tissues, initially they become red, and then they become violaceous, and finally they become black because of thrombosis and tissue necrosis. So angioinvasion is the important, I already mentioned, angioinvasion is the hallmark. Thrombosis and necrosis of the surrounding tissue is the hallmark, pathological hallmark of mucormycosis. Next slide, please. See, from the sinuses, the infection may extend into the periorbital region or orbital region, and it can result in periorbital swelling. It can cause orbital cellulitis, proptosis, chemosis, blurred vision, or rapidly progressing ophthalmoplegia, diplopia, eyelid gangrene. There can be detachment of retina, and it leads to finally endophthalmitis, which is a grave situation. Here the role of ophthalmologist is crucial. The infection can rapidly progress from the orbit into the intracranium. It may progress through the cavernous sinus into the central nervous system. A patient with advanced infection may have cranial neuropathies, altered sensorium, bony destruction, and the patient can develop retinal artery, internal carotid artery, cavernous, sagittal sinus thrombosis, and they can present with the frontal lobe necrosis, the symptoms of frontal lobe syndrome, and one can have epidural or subdural abscesses. These are the intracranial complications of invasive mucormycosis. Next slide, please. So I already mentioned the symptom complex can be grouped into 6 infectious syndromes. The most important one is rhinocerebral. Second one is pulmonary. Third one is cutaneous, gastrointestinal, disseminated, and rarely it can involve unusual sites. It can produce unusual presentations. We are concerned about rhinocerebral mucormycosis. We are not bothered about pulmonary mucormycosis. Pulmonary mucormycosis is uncommon in COVID patients. And cutaneous also is uncommon. And gastrointestinal is not seen in COVID patients. And gastrointestinal mucormycosis occurs in malnourished individuals who take herbal medication, who take allopurinol tablets, who take homeopathic medication, and who are malnourished, who have the habit of pica. And in extreme immunosuppression, the mucormycosis can disseminate. It can involve lung, it can involve kidney, it can involve brain. So it is called disseminated mucormycosis. The unusual presentations are bone can get affected, heart can get affected, basal ganglia of the brain can be affected, and sometimes kidney can be affected. So these are the unusual presentations. Sometimes mediastinum can get affected, trachea can get affected. So these are very, very unusual in mucormycosis. Next slide, please. Now, in the early stages, the symptoms are like any sinusitis. So one should have a high index of suspicion for making the diagnosis of mucormycosis. You cannot jump into the diagnosis of mucormycosis simply based on the pain in the sinus region, swelling of the sinus region. And how do you investigate, and what are the imaging modalities? See, once a clinical suspicion is found of mucormycosis involving sinuses, involving the nose, the important modalities of investigation are CT scanning and MRI. So CT and MRI are more useful for revealing soft tissue involvement around the nerve sheaths and bony destruction. See, this mucormycosis has a strong predilection to spread along the perineural tissues. Next slide, please. And I already told you CT scan, MRI are very useful, and the CSF analysis is of not sensitive method of investigation. So there is no role of CSF analysis, and plain X-ray of the sinus is also not going to give much sensitive findings to diagnose mucormycosis. So the best one is MRI, and equally good or CT scan. There are some 7 points, and of these 7 points, 2 are sufficient to make a high index of suspicion of mucormycosis. So this is a 7-point imaging module, and more than 2 means the patient is having highly suspicious of mucormycosis. So more than 2 means very high specificity. The number 1 is periantral fat stranding, and number 2 is bony dehiscence. Number 3 is nasal soft tissue septal ulceration. Remember, mucormycosis, first it affects middle turbinate, then it affects nasal septum, then enters into the sinus, maxillary sinus. And from the maxillary sinus, it invades into the orbit. And orbital invasion can be there, and pterygopalatine fossa extension can be there, nasolacrimal duct involvement can be there, lacrimal sac involvement. All these 7 findings are not necessary for the diagnosis of mucormycosis. 2 are sufficient to make the diagnosis confidently. Next slide, please. And see, this slide shows, this is a CT scan showing maxillary sinuses. The arrow marks on right side shows the bony dehiscence, very clearly seen, bony dehiscence of the lateral wall of the maxillary sinus. And in the lower image, one can see the fat strand. I told you periantral fat stranding is an important early feature of mucormycosis. See, the fat appears dark in CT scanning. See, the arrows on right side shows periantral dark shadow, that is called periantral fat stranding. And see the bony dehiscence on right side. Next slide, please. And the earliest structure involved in mucormycosis is the middle turbinate. You can see the ulceration of the middle turbinate on left side. See on right side, there is no ulceration of the middle turbinate on right side. And you also see the nasal septum, it got ulcerated. So ulceration of the middle turbinate and nasal septum are the earliest findings of mucormycosis. And next slide, please. And MRI is far superior to CT scanning in making the diagnosis of mucormycosis. See, the arrow shows a dark shadow that is a non-enhancing hypointense mucosa over the nasal turbinates. This is called black turbinate sign. It corresponds with the necrotic ishar. And the left side also, see the nasal septum, there is a dark shadow. And in the lower images, one can see the discontinuity of the enhancing mucosal lining, which is very characteristic of mucormycosis. This is because of the necrosis of the mucosa of the sinuses. So focal discontinuity of the enhancing mucosal lining is characteristic of mucormycosis. Next slide, please. And from the maxillary sinus, it gets spread into orbit. See the orbital invasion. See the floor of the orbit is invaded. There is a dehiscence in the floor of the orbit. See the mucosal thickening on left side of the maxillary sinus, and see the bony dehiscence. One can see the soft tissue inflammatory swelling of the inferior rectus muscle of the orbit on left side. So these are the paranasal sinuses showing hyperintense signals, means there is pansinusitis. And next slide. And mucormycosis has a predilection to spread along the nose. So the pterygopalatine fossa involvement is characteristic of mucormycosis. See the arrow on right side, that is the pterygopalatine fossa involvement. And from this, it goes into the infratemporal region. It can get affected later. So temporal involvement can be there from the pterygopalatine fossa involvement. Next slide. So the clinical signs and symptoms of mucormycosis are non-specific initially. So a high level of suspicion in susceptible patient is of paramount importance, and this can be confirmed by biopsy and culture from sterile sites. Next slide. Now, a number of staining techniques have been used. The most important one, hematoxylin eosin staining, and Grocott-Gomery methenamine silver nitrate staining, periodic acid skiff staining, KVH staining is very commonly used, and chalcophore white staining and blancophore staining. So the chalcophore white staining uses fluorescent technology to detect hyphae. So this is very sensitive. This is more sensitive than the KVH staining. Next slide, please. See, these are the hyphae. These are the sporangia, and this is the lactophenol cotton blue staining. Next slide, please. This is the hematoxylin eosin staining showing the ribbon-shaped hyphae. And next slide, please. This is the methenamine silver nitrate staining showing the hyphae. And this is the KOH staining showing the hyphae, but it's not very clear. And this chalcophore staining, which uses fluorescent technology and is very superior, far superior to KOH staining. So having made the diagnosis of mucormycosis, and after properly investigating, next slide, please. Now, the treatment, successful treatment of mucormycosis relies on multifaceted strategy, and that includes aggressive attempts at diagnosis and rapid initiation of effective antifungal therapy, and extensive surgical debridement and rapid control of underlying medical conditions is very important. And we have to pressurize the ENT surgeon, and surgical debridement. Next slide, please. Surgical debridement of cutaneous lesions is very crucial. It must be done without delay, because in the dead tissue, the amphotericin B which is the only antifungal agent, cannot go to that area and it cannot kill the fungus. So surgical debridement of cutaneous lesions is crucial and it must be done without delay. Sometimes it has to be repeated because of the aggressively invasive nature of the mucormycosis. So, and this is a coordinated approach, a coordination of multiple specialties involving surgery, infectious disease specialist, head and neck surgeon, neurosurgery, neurology, ophthalmology, pathology, clinical microbiology, radiology, and plastic surgery. They are very crucial. Next slide, please. Now, one is antifungal, number two, surgical debridement, number three, the management of comorbidities. One should not forget the most common cause for mucormycosis is hyperglycemia, uncontrolled hyperglycemia. So rapid control of hyperglycemia is very, very important, even in COVID patient. And we are considering that the irrational use of steroids is the reason for mucormycosis prevalence in post-COVID patients or during COVID treatment. And reversal of ketoacidosis is very important, and tapering of steroid therapy is very, very crucial. Hyperbaric oxygen is of benefit. Hyperbaric oxygen improves neutrophilic activity and it facilitates the killing by antifungals. We can also try the administration of cytokines, interferons. And lastly, one can assess the virulence of the mucormycosis by the genetic analysis. This is to develop new drugs. As of now, only few drugs are available. There is no role of ketoconazole. There is no role of itraconazole. There is no role of voriconazole. Only the drugs which are useful in mucormycosis are amphotericin B and azoles. Azoles, we have posaconazole and isavuconazole. And the treatment of mucormycosis by these drugs will be dealt tomorrow by Dr. Sudhakar. And so, next slide, please. This is one of my patients presented to me with periorbital cellulitis chemosis. And he was referred to GGH. He is doing fine with antifungals. He did not undergo any debridement. Next slide, please. Same patient. So during this last 1 week, I have referred 5-6 cases to GGH who are post-COVID patients and who have developed rhino, sino, orbito, but nobody had cerebral involvement, only rhino, sino, orbital involvement of mucormycosis. Next slide. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you, sir. Dr. Sudhakar, sir.
Yeah, video. Thank you very much, Dr. Sundarachari, for your explicit, at the same time very exhaustive account on the various aspects of mucormycosis. There are certain questions that are usually raised by people. Being a neurologist, how do you see would be the signs and symptoms of the involvement of the brain? If so, what needs to be done? Do you think that involvement of the brain will be heralded by the antifungal therapy? If not, what surgery needs to be done there? When do you call for a surgeon's intervention as far as the brain is concerned?
So if the patient develops internal carotid artery thrombosis, he may go into stroke, sir. That is the problem of neurologist, and we have to continue antifungals, and we have to continue anti-thrombotic medication, heparin. If the patient develops an abscess, I already told, epidural abscess, subdural abscesses can occur, a frontal lobe abscess can occur. So if there is an abscess which is causing mass effect, we need to involve neurosurgeon. And it can involve cavernous sinus. Cavernous sinus is an important structure which can produce chemosis, which can produce ophthalmoplegia. So even for cavernous sinus thrombosis, the treatment is only medical, sir. There's no surgical intervention required. So very often, once the CNS is involved, the condition is fatal, very aggressive, and they're going to die, sir. The mortality is very high, around 70 to 80%, sir. If the CNS is involved. If it is confined to sinus only, the prognosis is better. The mortality is around 15 to 20%. So once it is becoming more invasive, when it involves orbit, when it involves cavernous sinus, it involves CNS, the mortality increases, sir.
Yeah. One more common query that many of the practitioners have is about the hyperglycemia. People say the more the hyperglycemia, the more the chances of mucormycosis, and it is imperative to bring back the glycemic state to the normalcy. So if somebody is having a hyperglycemia, the blood sugars to the range of 400 or 500, how soon do you think the blood sugars can be brought down to the normalcy? If somebody is having 400 blood sugar, how soon the blood sugars can be brought to the normalcy?
Within few hours. Sometimes we need to give parenteral intravenous insulin infusion to control hyperglycemia, and is usually associated with ketoacidosis also. So the combination of hyperglycemia and ketoacidosis makes the patient prone for aggressive fast spreading mucormycosis, sir. So we have to do intravenous infusion of those circumstances.
Yeah, no. Normally, the physicians usually say that it would take about 3 or 4 days for the euglycemia to be achieved. Is it true that it would take that long? Because 3 to 4 days of time is very precious, particularly in the rapidly spreading mucormycosis. What is your?
No, sir. Corrected fast. It has to be corrected soon.
Yeah. One more aspect is, unless we know as to why it is happening, it's very difficult to control it. In the sense, it's difficult to prevent it. So, do you have any thoughts of the cell-mediated immunity contributing to the excessive cases that we see here? Are there any data to show us that the CD4, CD8 count in these patients would be of some help to know what the cell-mediated immunity is like?
My impression is only hyperglycemia, which causes phagocytic function, which is causing iron overload, and it's multifactorial, but the most important reason is hyperglycemia only. The COVID itself can cause hyperglycemia by the entry to the pancreas. COVID can cause immune dysregulation. It can cause cytokine storm. It can cause hyperphagia. It can cause lymphopenia. So not one reason, sir. It's multifactorial, but the important reason is only hyperglycemia. And we are giving steroids without any rationale. I don't think we are giving steroids the rational dose, and the duration also we're not considering. So that's the reason the irrational usage of steroids, the right time, right patient, right dose, right duration of steroids is very important. So the phagocyte dysfunction of hyperglycemia and the phagocyte dysfunction of because of glucocorticoids playing a very important, crucial role in the invasive mucormycosis, sir.
Now, as you are aware that there are many conditions wherein steroids are used, particularly in the rheumatology.
Yes.
And you also know that there are many patients who present to the physician for the first time with 400 and odd blood sugars. And it's very rare for these physicians to see the mucormycosis in that event. But what do you think is the relationship between the COVID-19 and the uncontrolled diabetes leading to the mucormycosis?
As a neurologist, I have seen tens of, not hundreds, tens of cases of mucormycosis during my practice before the COVID era. All were having ketoacidosis. Now, the reasons for fast spreading epidemic proportion of mucormycosis in COVID pandemic is the irrational use of steroids, sir. So the steroids are based on recovery trial of UK. You know that, sir.
Yeah.
But in UK, mucormycosis is uncommon. In US also, mucormycosis is uncommon. India is the capital of mucormycosis. My suggestion is, the recovery trial is based on 28 days mortality. They have given 8 milligrams of Decadron and they have assessed the mortality on 28th day, where mucormycosis was not there. See, sir, as a neurologist, we use steroids for many cases like multiple sclerosis, collagen disorders, poliomyositis, dermatomyositis. But where are the indications for steroids in a viral infection, sir? So I think there is no rationale in use of steroids even in that proportion. That's my contention, sir. See, in case of tuberculosis meningitis, we give steroids on par with, in addition to ATT. And in case of pneumococcal meningitis, we give steroids with antibiotics to prevent deafness. So, because it is a novel virus, there is no antiviral drug available. We don't know, just we are presuming that steroids are useful. So without antivirals, what is the rationale in using steroids? That is the reason for this fast spreading epidemic proportions of mucormycosis. That's my opinion, sir.
Yeah, Dr. Sundarachari, as you said, this particular fungus thrives on the iron. So do you think that the serum transferrin levels or the iron profile investigations will throw some light on this for future?
Sir, hyperferritinemia is an important risk factor of mucormycosis. And using deferoxamine is harmful. This deferoxamine utilizes iron. This complex provides iron to the fungus. So it is detrimental to use deferoxamine if there is iron overload. So hyperferritinemia occurs in COVID infection. One of the markers, one of the acute phase reactants, one of the biological markers for assessing the prognosis is hyperferritinemia, in addition to CRP, in addition to LDH, IL-6. So this hyperferritinemia is playing an important role in mucormycosis, sir. But unfortunately, there is no way to deal with hyperferritinemia.
Yeah.
And I have also tried Deficerox, which is antifungal, but one of the trials mentioned that there is a role of the other iron chelating agent, Deficerox. So there is no role of iron chelating agents. Hyperferritinemia is an important risk factor for mucormycosis.
Yeah, there was a question in the chat box asking whether RBS, random blood sugar levels, are to be considered, or the HbA1c. Will the HbA1c throw some more light into the reason for getting exposed to the mucormycosis.
Sir, hemoglobin A1C estimates the average glucose level of the past 3 months. Random blood sugar, suppose last night I did not take any dinner, morning if they check, it will be normal. So I prefer only hemoglobin A1C rather than random blood sugar, sir.
And there was a question on how rapidly does it spread from the sinus to the orbit, and I think that is highly speculative because it all depends on the various other factors. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Sundarachari, for your elaborate exposition. And now I would request Dr. Rohan Deshpande, the MDS, is the oral and the maxillofacial surgeon and the consultant maxillofacial surgeon, Nagpur. And may I request Dr. Rohan to share your screen. Dr. Deshpande, you are not audible.
Am I audible, sir, now?
Yeah, you are audible, but please be a little louder. You may have your microphone closer to you.
Am I audible now, sir?
Yeah, it's better.
Yes. Right. First of all,
Yeah.
so first of all, it's an complete honor to be presenting whatever cases and whatever I've learned all through these days and months regarding mucormycosis with my fellow colleagues and doctors in Andhra Pradesh. This is purely whatever my experience has been throughout all these 6-7 years regarding mucor. Before the COVID era also, I have had 2 or 3 cases of mucormycosis which I've dealt with, which were purely diabetic patients, uncontrolled diabetics. And as sir had pointed out, we had a very single most pointing factor as diabetic ketoacidosis. There was no steroid use or abuse that we have seen all through. But these patients were purely diabetic. With all the information that sir has shared regarding the pathophysiology, the overall biology, and the treatment and the scans, what we need to do, I would be specifically dealing with the surgical aspect, because since we get a lot of referral from the local dentist, because patients do report to them with saying that they have a black patch inside their mouth, their teeth are mobile, the whole bone, sometimes the maxillary alveolus is also mobile. So we generally have a lot of referrals coming down from the local dentist. Once we have gone through a complete thorough clinical examination with medical history, we then plan our surgeries based on the CT scan and the MRI. Of course, this is a teamwork. We need ENT surgeons, we need ophthalmologists, we need intensivists, we need neurologists, neurosurgeons along with us to deal with this disease. As we know, it is very aggressive. And since the disease is aggressive, there is no role of any kind of conservative treatment, is what I have learned all through this time. Now, once we start to actually counsel the patient regarding what we are planning to do with the infection, it is of prime importance that we actually need to tell the patient that major chunk of their jaws may be removed, the function may be hampered, we may lose, the patient may lose a complete set of teeth on one side. We have had cases wherein we have gone for total maxillectomies or subtotal maxillectomies with eyeball removal or eyeball exenteration type 1. So this is an extensive disease, and then there is no role for any kind of conservative treatment. As sir had mentioned in his presentation as well, that there can be a possibility of serial debridement. Uh, Technically speaking, theoretically speaking, yes, there is a role of serial debridement, but considering the general Indian population, uh, the first chance that we get to treat the disease surgically, that remains our best chance, and we should be dealing it with aggressively. As far as mucormycosis is concerned, I would just like to share experience of dealing with patients who are also having aspergillosis. These patients do not have a very aggressive rhino-orbital kind of an component, but these patients may land up with pulmonary aspergillosis secondary to COVID infection. And I have been dealing with patients who are in the age group of 20 to 35 who were non-diabetic. Few of them were district level, state level volleyball player and basketball players who were home quarantined, no role of oxygen supply, no major intravenous steroid depots being given, but still have developed mucormycosis and aspergillosis. So I would just like to also tell the fraternity that we have a component of aspergillosis with us also, which is not that invasive, yes, accepted, but then we cannot actually go ahead and think of it as less aggressive, unlike mucormycosis. So going ahead, what we generally plan is a low level maxillectomy or a complete maxillectomy depending on the number of sites that have been involved. So as you can see here, we have gone through a transoral approach, and in the resected specimen, you can see the anterolateral wall, the medial wall, uh, complete disjunction from the pterygoid plates, and we come down completely to the anterior part of the maxilla or the premaxilla. We do have a large defect that remains inside the oral cavity, and after complete 14 days of dose of amphotericin B, we then consecutively actually see how the wound is shrinking or what amount of fibrosis is there, and then we go ahead and plan for a maxillofacial prosthesis. Uh,
Slide 17.
Hello. So we then plan for.
Dr. Rohan, yeah,
Yes.
you can change your slides also as you speak.
Yes, sure, sir. Sure, sir. So here we can see the intraoral defect being there. This is a transoral approach. The next approach is more of a conventional approach where we take a Weber-Ferguson incision with a subciliary extension. Here we also needed to remove the eyeball. Aesthetics are good provided you have a good surgical approach towards it. You handle the tissue well, it heals. So extraoral scars and intraoral procedures is totally dependent on you as a surgeon. If you are comfortable doing it, please go ahead, open up a flap, take out everything that you can see, because as I said, there is no conservative approach to this. With just a small little video where you can see actually the flap being reflected. You can see up to the zygoma. We have the opening up to the zygoma, and you can see this patient I had to do as an extraoral procedure because the patient already had type 3 or grade 3 submucous fibrosis, which was already present. So an intraoral approach was not a feasible option in his case. So we went ahead and chose an extraoral approach. This is what a resected specimen looks like. The anterolateral wall. You have the teeth completely there. You have the uh, posterior aspect with connection with the pterygoid plates and the medial wall. This is how probably a surgical site post resection will look like. This is the immediate post-op picture of the patient, which with good closure with what we can get. As far as the surgical approaches go, I prefer to actually proceed with the intraoral approach as far as possible, just to maintain whatever facial symmetry we can maintain. But of course, if the disease is extensive, we have to open up everything, go ahead, debride. Not to, I mean, must mention the role of ENT surgeons in this case, wherein in most of my cases also I had to have an ENT surgeon along with me, because most of the times the sphenoid sinus, the ethmoid sinus had been involved where there was mucosal thickening, and we had actually gone in aggressively, cleared out everything, and then sent everything for culture and sensitivity. Uh, Second important thing that I want to tell you, that with all these defects, role of a maxillofacial prosthodontist is also very important, wherein not only the intraoral jaws and teeth that can be made up, which can actually give good function to the patient, but also a maxillofacial prosthodontist can make a good eyeball prosthesis as well. So if you have an ophthalmologist working with you, works extremely well, wherein you can actually make sure that lids are spared or not. If there is an exenteration which is type 2, where you are losing some skin also, small little eyelids and eyeballs can be made with good quality silicone, and the patient can be given a good prosthesis as well. As far as recent cases that I've seen, which I have operated about 15 or 20 days back, maybe 3 weeks back, what I have also seen is wherever there has been a little conservative approach as far as treating the disease is concerned in younger patients, where we have not gone ahead and removed the maxilla, we have actually seen a secondary osteomyelitis, a secondary bacterial osteomyelitis that I've seen. So I have 5 cases where I have had secondary bacterial osteomyelitis, and I had to again go in, clear out everything, send it for histopathology just to check that there is no regrowth of fungus. So this probably remains the only factor. Age is the only factor which will determine whether you will be going aggressively and doing a hemimaxillectomy in every possible case, or maybe you will be just removing the anterolateral wall of maxilla, going in, clearing out everything, and then letting the ENT surgeon do the rest and clearing out the ethmoid and the ethmoid frontal and the sphenoid sinuses, because their role also remains very important. As far as the hospitals that I work in, we have made up a protocol wherein pre-operatively we always have a consultation done by a ENT surgeon, ophthalmologist, and a neurophysician or a neurosurgeon, whoever is available, so that we have actually taken out whatever risk factors that may be in the case. Even if we can feel that while resecting, as sir had said, that you have recurrences coming from the pterygopalatine fossa because the infratemporal fossa gets involved immediately, we can actually have a consultation with a neurosurgeon as well, so that whatever risk is there, considering the mortality with the disease, can be told to the patient and the relatives beforehand, so that they know what is going to happen post-operatively. Whatever risk factors are there need to be told, and then only we go ahead. So as far as mucormycosis is concerned, we have been treating the patients post-operatively with amphotericin B, liposomal one, 3 milligram to 5 milligram per kilogram body weight, and posaconazole also has been very good. Isuvaconazole is another drug which is now commonly used for invasive mucormycosis. These 3 drugs are the mainstay for treating mucormycosis post-surgically. The other important fact that was being talked about during sir's presentation was hyperglycemia, ketoacidosis, and steroids. As far as what I could understand all through is that we cannot be proactive in this disease. We are mostly reacting to the disease, and we are not a step ahead of the disease. And that is a problem, because fungal diseases are not being treated day in and day out like other diseases. So we are a step behind the disease, and once the disease has set in, we actually are reacting to whatever we are able to see, and that's why the serial debridement part comes in. But that is the fact. That is a fact that we are dealing with every day. Probably in Maharashtra, we are having approximately 3,000 cases that are being treated, and there has been a lack of amphotericin B as well, and that is being now made available over a period of time. So we hope that there are less mortalities, least possible mortalities, because now patients are coming up with all the awareness programs that have been developed. Patients are coming up by themselves when they have smallest possible doubt that they might be suffering from mucormycosis. So these all factors taken into account, as far as a maxillofacial surgery is concerned, the surgical approach pretty much remains the same. We go in, we take out whatever bone we find to be necrotic. Wherever we don't see bleed, we keep taking it out until the time we have a decent fresh bleed coming from the bony edges. We stop. That remains our safe margin, and then we debride everything. If we have few walls of maxilla present, we may be putting in a back of it out and maybe closing the gap if available, if some tissue is available. But for us as such, that remains the same line of treatment, and ENT surgeons would take over from there and clear out the other sinuses, making the patient free of the disease. This is probably the best possible way that I have found to treat mucormycosis being aggressive. We deal it with aggressively. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Rohan. There are some questions in the chat box, though not related to your specialty. I'll try to answer them as much as possible. Yugandhar says that the steroids are very useful, and if we find that the steroids are one of the reasons for mucormycosis, how can we go about it? One has to clearly understand that steroids and oxygen are the game changers in the treatment of COVID-19. No reason to withhold the steroids when it is indicated. So whatever has been said is about the dosage and usage for the limited period of time. So it has been well documented, and it has been established and recommended that 6 milligrams of dexamethasone should be used for 10 days, and after that it has to be stopped. So prolonged use and usage of too much of dosage are the ones which are the culprits, but there is no reason to believe that the steroids are not useful. Steroids are definitely useful, but only thing is they have to be used on time, at the right time, in the right dosage, and has to be stopped at the right time. So that's as far as the Yugandhar's question is concerned.
Sir, can I
Yeah.
Can I just add one point, sir? Sir, I have had patients who were home quarantined, who were given not more than 8 milligrams of steroids, young patients who also developed mucormycosis. So I suppose just pinpointing a problem or pinpointing something at just steroids or only hyperglycemia won't be fair. This is a much multifactorial thing, and probably the second strain of the COVID virus is much more aggressive and fatal as compared to the first one. So this is what I have learned through the patients that I have seen.
Yeah, Dr. Rohan, the point is well taken, but there is a lot more investigation need to be done. That's the reason why we are having webinars, so that people will come out with some conclusive evidence as to which factor is playing more. What we are going forward. And Kshetra says, asks a question here, though not relevant to your subject. She says the effect of 2-DG, 2-deoxy-D-glucose. Please do remember that it is not available in the market as yet. However, once it is available in the market, then we will come to know its effect in the COVID-19 management. The earlier reports are very favorable, and Andhra Medical College happens to be one of the sites where that particular study has been done, and it will be made available in the month of June to a limited extent. And phase 4 trials are also being planned by the DRDO. This is the information as of now. And Samhita says that what is the role of monoclonal antibodies? Will it prevent the mucormycosis? I think that is too far outstretched a question, because we do not have the monoclonal antibodies widely used in our country. It has just arrived in our country and it's being used only in few places. So the monoclonal antibodies are used right in the beginning of the disease. Hence, to speculate that the monoclonal antibodies are going to make much difference is something which is not possible at this moment of time. And Dr. M.V. Apparao poses a question of the antifungal, perioperative usage of the antifungal. He asks whether without using the antifungal, would it be detrimental to operate on these patients, is the question. But it is always advisable to have the perioperative antifungal, and if possible, even if the injectables are not available, in the limited constraint situations like what we have, even the tablets of the posaconazole to be started, and then the surgery has to be performed. If later it can be continued with the tablets, or if the injectables are available, the posaconazole injection can always be given. That's how it should be. But under ideal circumstances, the injectables are to be started, and we have to wait and see if there is any regression of the lesion, and if there is an indication. If there is no regression of the lesion, then we will have to go and operate, definitely. But it's always better to have some antifungal coverage. So that's about Dr. M.V. Apparao's question. And Dr. Jyoti asked as to what is the dose of the liposomal amphotericin. We have to understand that it is 5 milligrams per kg body weight. Depending on the weight of the individuals, the number of vials that need to be administered depends. Like each vial is available, and the strength of amphotericin be 50 milligrams. If somebody is 370 kilos, they require 7 vials. That indicates that they'll have to have 350 milligrams. So that is about the liposomal amphotericin. The Rajashekar asked a question on the colchicine, usage of colchicine in COVID-19. Though they are all not related to your subject, not related to mucormycosis, there are many questions that are cropping up in this chat box that I am trying to answer them. There was a study by the Bronx Care Hospital, New York, on the colchicine, the usage of it. It is very promising, and it's time that we also should try to do a larger number of people with by administering colchicine. And Dr. Vijay Shekhar posed a question as to which one do you prefer to operate first between the sinus and orbit if both of them require the decompression. Do you have to say anything, Dr. Rohan?
Sir, it's a completely multidisciplinary approach that we have. So you can actually gain access to the orbit through the maxilla as well, or you can have the ophthalmologist starting with the extraoral procedure, the exentration, along with the maxillofacial surgeon or the ENT surgeon. So per se, it won't actually have any kind of bearing on the outcome, even if you are doing the eye first and going to the maxilla then. So it doesn't have a great bearing on the outcome of the procedure and the disease. So the point
well taken. It basically indicates that it is the convenience of the surgeons, whichever way you want to do it. And somebody asked a question as to after how many days that we can say safely that there won't be any mucormycosis after recovery from the COVID-19. That it's not possible to say at this moment of time, because the experience that we have after COVID has been very limited, and the studies keep on, the epidemiological studies need to be done more often, and maybe in a month or two we will come back with more data in order to understand as to what is the safer period, or how long after the COVID-19 we are going to say that provided the blood sugars are under control. And Dr. Buchiraju says in this series, in few series of this pandemic, 15 to 20% are not exposed to the steroids at all, but still they are getting this mucormycosis, which has been already discussed by us right in the beginning of this particular forum. And so that's all for now, and we will always come back with more questions and answer these questions which are coming up in the chat box towards the end. And thank you very much, Dr. Rohan.
Thank you
And
so much.
and now I would request Dr. Chanakya, the young ENT surgeon who has been doing a very good service through his endoscopic nasal surgery. And over to you, Dr. Chanakya, who is a consultant in Sai Super Speciality Hospital in Rajahmundry. Dr. Chanakya, please share your screen. You can unshare your screen, Dr. Rohan. Please unshare your screen so that Dr. Chanakya can share his screen.
Sir, am I audible now?
Yeah, Chanakya, you can go ahead.
Yes, sir.
And share your screen. I think you have shared your screen, but go back.
Starting it. Yeah.
Presentation. Yeah, please keep it in slideshow. Yeah.
Yeah. Is the voice clear, sir? Shall I start?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. That was a very elaborated description by Dr. Sundarachari sir and Dr. Rohan. Thank you very much for making that part of the explanation easier. So we'll directly jump into the mucormycosis from an ENT perspective. I'm Dr. Chanakya, working in Rajahmundry as an ENT surgeon, and here is the presentation. And mucormycosis is caused by myriad of reasons, and that's why we need a multidisciplinary approach to tackle it both in prevention and during the cure stage. And mucormycosis, as it is very radical and very invasive, we need to have a radical and a zero tolerant approach in order to treat it. Early debridement and regular surveillance. Early debridement is equally important, and a regular surveillance of the post-operative cavity is equally important in order to know how much it is spreading further and what to do next. The regular surveillance is in two ways. It is both endoscopic and via investigations. We take CRP as a good prognosticator for the surgery. Once we operate, we daily monitor the CRP values and ESR values, which are both cost effective and a good prognosticators for the post-op development or post-op progress of the disease. The CRP values regularly do come down. They might be a slight surge in the levels of CRP immediately post-operative, but once it crosses the 4th day, if it doesn't come down, we must be very vigilant. We should not take our ego in our head, and we should not overlook it. We should regularly go back. We should religiously go back and see what is wrong with that post-operative cavity, whether it is spreading or not. So 4 days is the maximum time where CRP keeps on rising, and after 4th day, if it doesn't come down or if it doesn't start coming down, better go back, see what you have done, and correct if it is possible. Endoscopic surveillance, every second post-operative day, please do an endoscopy of the diagnostic nasal endoscopy of the cavity. Regularly debride what are the crust, because this is a very radical surgery. We do not excuse any mucosa, any bone, anything which is around there. Just take off everything which is eaten by mucor, only then we can save the patient. So every second post-operative day, we do a diagnostic nasal endoscopy. We remove the crust wherever possible. We regularly put betadine in the dressings, and we usually ask the patient to wash the nasal cavities with normal saline with soda bicarbonate. There are commercially available preparations for that. We regularly ask the patients to use it, and every second day we go back, see the endoscopy, and do the crust removal, etc. The next important thing is post-operative period. Post-operative period, monitoring of the blood parameters like serum creatinine and other investigations, whether to assess the state of the patient, whether he can be able to take the injections or not. And injections, antifungals, amphotericin B, posaconazole, and isavuconazole have a very, very, very important role. Whatever we have debrided, that can be followed up only with good IV antifungal administration. Coming to the symptoms, there are n number of symptoms coming to this. There are very vaguely presenting symptoms, but the most classical symptoms which are enumerated here are cheek numbness, swelling on the cheek, pain in the eye, swelling of the eye, headache, facial pain, ache in the upper tooth, ulcers on the palate, and brownish nasal discharge. Sometimes the patient present with epiphora also. Coming to the clinical classification, we have classified this mucormycosis in 3 separate zones. The zone 1 is which involves the maxilla, middle meatus, ethmoids, and middle turbinate. The zone 2 is one step ahead of this stage. When the disease progresses anteriorly, it is towards the cheek, and when it is progressing posteriorly, it is to the pterygopalatine fossa, infratemporal fossa, and temporalis fascia, temporalis muscle, and temporal fossa laterally. The zone 3, which is the most difficult and the most aggressive and the worst prognosis zone, is extension to the sphenoid, cavernous sinus, orbit, and intracranial invasion. One point which I would like to stress here is the orbital apex and the cavernous sinus. Both are the main gateways for intracranial invasion. So whenever there is a disease at that point of time, it is the final alarm bell for us to operate. Once it crosses that, like what Sundaracharya sir has already mentioned, once it goes into the intracranial level or intracranial stage starts, the mortality or the fatality of the disease is very high. It is somewhere around 80 to 100%, according to the literature. Before going to the operative steps, now one thing which I'll make clear is we are going to show a case of zone 2, which is the most common presentation in this scenario, because zone 1 is regularly neglected because of normal bacterial sinusitis or will be just escaped with an X-ray. And zone 2 is where people generally present to us. In the past 20 days, if I have seen somewhere around 50 mucor patients, 45 or 40 of them are in the zone 2. Another 5 or 10 are in the zone 3. But zone 1, I have not seen a single patient as of now. Coming to that, this is a very important slide, because mucor which has presented earlier and mucor which is presenting now are completely 2 different sides of a coin. Previously, mucormycosis used to be one classical presentation. Black eschar seen, go, it is mucormycosis. But now, no. The classical symptom of black eschar is not always seen in this scenario, especially mucormycosis endemic in this pandemic. It is not the certain presentation. There are n number of various presentations. It is cadaveric tissue, pale dead tissue, with sometimes people present with bacterial acute sinusitis like picture. Acute mucopurulent discharge occupying the nasal cavity is also a doubtful, you should also be doubtful for a mucormycosis. Second thing, previously, the most common site, already had been mentioned, it is the middle turbinate or the maxillary sinus ostium near that level. So the myth is it will be surely seen on endoscopy. You can see a black eschar on endoscopy, only then the diagnosis is mucormycosis. No, it need not always present on DNA. We have seen n number of cases where the nose looks absolutely normal, but the pathology is in the maxillary sinus and it is going posteriorly, anteriorly, and wherever it wants from the maxillary sinus. It is not coming into the nasal cavity. So it need not always present on diagnostic nasal endoscopy. The third myth is any invasive fungal sinusitis, every invasive fungal sinusitis will be invading bone or eroding bone and then only spreading locally. But no, this is not the truth. The trait of mucormycosis is angio-invasive. That means it invades via blood vessels. It goes the other room just by blood supply, not by eroding the bone. That is why in many of the cases, even if the patient is infected with the fungus in the posterior or post-antral tissue like pterygopalatine fossa or infratemporal fossa, the posterior wall of the maxilla remains beautifully intact. It might be thinned out. It might be pathological on examination, but it is intact. It has very rarely it has been breached. But the property which we need to be extra cautious or giving extra importance is the angio-invasive trait of the mucormycosis, and that is how we'll be able to save the lives. Next, the fourth myth is CT scan. CT scan is the investigation of choice in all invasive fungal sinusitis. No, CT scan, yes, CT scan is helpful, but CT scan as an investigation of choice is not in this Mucor scenario. MRI contrast with a fat suppression is the investigation of choice. If at all there is another option, you can go for a CT scan. But if you need to choose one scan, go for an MRI contrast with fat suppression, so that you will be able to know how exactly the disease has progressed and what is the extent of your surgical debridement. MRI study before operation is the best way to enter the surgery, so that you will know what your limits are. Because see, even a single day passed of the MRI and means the investigation MRI is done on 30th and you're operating on 31st, you need to go one extra level to see where it has spread, because every day this Mucor is very aggressive. It doesn't stay, it doesn't sit idle, it keeps on invading and spreading at its will. So one day MRI also you need to be extra cautious. That is why MRI reading is important. If the MRI of 30th shows pterygopalatine fossa, go check infratemporal fossa. If the 30th MRI shows infratemporal fossa, go check the temporalis muscle and lateral. Please check the cheek tissue also. So that is how, these are the regular myths which I have seen till now, and these are the truth which we have observed in this Mucor presentation, mucormycosis at this point of time. Coming to the case which we are presenting, we present a case of mucormycosis operated at a hospital. A 55-year-old male who has recovered from COVID 15 days after COVID, complained of left eye pain and double vision from the past 3 days. He's a known diabetic and hypertensive from the past 3 years, and a diagnostic nasal endoscopy revealed a pale cadaveric-like tissue. I'll show you the images in the coming slides. And MRI PNS with contrast and fat suppression was suggested, a surgical workup done, and proper formal consent was taken, and case was taken up for surgery. What is proper formal consent? Like Rohan sir already mentioned, consent is one of the major thing which plays a major role in this scenario, because our surgery might not be the final surgery. We have to very well explain the patient that he might need serial debridements, he might need a second stage surgery, because whatever we see is what we see only. The micro-invasive nature of the mucormycosis cannot be assessed. One thing is sure, if we good debridement and good margins, the recurrence rate is less. But nevertheless, you cannot certainly say, yes, this is 100%, this will not go and recur after some time. We can never assure. So better take the consent of a re-surgery or second surgery. And the same time, even if it is a stage 2 and it has not gotten to the orbit, there is every chance of microangiopathies which might cause infarction of the central retinal artery, and various thrombus which might go into the brain and cause central nervous system complications also. So please make it a point that you mention all these complications in the consent taken, because we will be answerable in the court of law. This is the patient, this is the scan of the patient which we were talking, and these 3 stages are if you can see the images on the right, two images on the right side are T1 weighted images, and this is a T2 weighted image. And this is not just T2 weighted, it is a T2 weighted fat suppressed image. Like what we have said, this is the T1 weighted, and this thing which is seen is the dead Mucor tissue or Mucor which is occupying the maxillary sinus. And this is T1 weighted after contrast, and this is T2 weighted fat suppressed. See, the periorbital fat is suppressed, and this T2 weighted fat suppressed image is what we need to follow. This is the infection which is present after suppressing every hyperintensity caused by fat, because MRI is the T1 or T2 weighted images, fat is almost bright on both the sides. It is bright and it is light on T1 and T2. But once we suppress only, we can examine, we can actually know what tissue is already involved. This is the T2 label, T2 image which is labeled here. I was mentioning why is it important to read the scan properly. See, in this patient, when we see both the sides in this scan, it is a T1 weighted image, and in this you can see a slight hyperintensity on the right side, and this side is normal. So once we go to the T2 weighted fat suppressed image, this is suppressed on, this is the retroantral or postantral part of fat, and this is suppressed, but still it is hyperintense. That means this posterior part of the maxilla or postantral tissue or the infratemporal and pterygopalatine fossa tissues are already infected with the fungus. And like we already mentioned, this is a radical approach and zero tolerance approach. So this is the endoscopic picture. We'll go through some pictures first, and then I'll show the video, parts of the video which we have operated. And this is the pictures. This is the situation of the mucosa. See, this is not a classical black eschar-like presentation, but even then, once you see this sort of a mucosa, you should be this is the alarm sign. This should be ringing the bells in your mind that, okay, this is mucor, we need to operate it as soon as possible. And this is the unhealthy lateral wall mucosa, which is seen here. And this is the starting step of the surgery. We all know the pyriform aperture. So we coblate at the anterior end of the inferior turbinate at the pyriform aperture, so as to gain access. This is an operation which is a medial maxillectomy, endoscopic Denker's approach. So once we coblate at the anterior end of the pyriform, anterior end of the inferior turbinate, that is a pyriform aperture, we expose the anterior wall of the maxilla. This is the anterior wall of the maxilla, and this is the anterolateral wall. We dissect this anterolateral wall of the maxilla, and we dissect it laterally, keeping our lateral limit as the infraorbital nerve. Infraorbital foramen is the lateral exposure, lateral limit of our exposure. If one complains of a cheek numbness, better, it is 99% confirmed that the infraorbital nerve which supplies the cheek is involved, and okay, this should be taken off in the surgery. So this patient did not complain that, so we expose till the lateral exposure is till the infraorbital foramen. And once this is done, we elevate. See, this is the inferior meatus, inferior turbinate and inferior meatus. This forms the lateral wall of the nose and medial wall of the maxilla. This image is the bone of the inferior meatus. We have elevated the mucosa in the inferior meatus, and this shows the medial wall of the maxilla or the lateral wall of the nose. And see, this is the normal healthy bone, and see the diseased bone. This will all go in the due course of the surgery. Whatever we were doing till now is not actual surgery. We are trying to gain access to every part of the tissue which is involved later on in the surgery. This is just the exposure part. Next step is exposure of the maxillary sinus. Like what we have already seen here, we'll make an opening at this point and peep through the maxillary sinus. And this is what we have seen in the maxillary sinus. This is not a typical presentation of a mucormycosis, but yes, this is mucor in this patient. And this is the maxillary sinus, and this is the nasal cavity. This is the lateral wall of the nose or the medial wall of the maxilla. The whole lateral wall of the nose and the medial wall of the maxilla will go till the posterior pterygoid plates. Will completely removed till the pterygoid plate. And this is the lateral wall mucosa which is being removed with the help of a debrider. And once we do this, the next structure which we'll see is the nasolacrimal duct. The nasolacrimal duct opens into the inferior wall, inferior meatus, and this should be, the exposure should be continued below till the alveolar recess. The exposure limits laterally till the infraorbital foramen. If it is not involved, this exposure, anterior exposure till the alveolar recess, medial exposure, medial wall of the maxilla, superior exposure, it should be flush with the infraorbital floor of the orbit. That means roof of the maxilla. The exposure should be till that level. Once we do that, we transect the nasolacrimal duct at the flush with the floor of the orbit. Once this exposure is completed, this is what we get. We get the end-on exposure. We need not use angled endoscopes. This is a 0-degree endoscope which we are seeing, and we can see completely the nasopharynx, choana. This is the pterygoid area. This is the pterygopalatine fossa, and this is the infratemporal fossa, and this is the floor of the orbit. See, the exposure will be, upper limit of the exposure is till the floor of the orbit. This is the complete posterior, complete exposure. Till now, there is only half part of the surgery which has been done by removing the dead tissue in the maxillary sinus. Remember to strip off the whole mucosa. Only then you can see completely the bone, whether the bone is healthy or not. If it is not healthy, then it is a time to call our maxillofacial person, maxillofacial colleague to finish off that maxillectomy. And this is the exposure of the posterior wall. Once we reach the posterior wall of the maxilla, we remove it. This is the, if you see cleanly, the consistency of the bone or the color of the bone or the appearance of the bone is changing from below to the superior level. This is actually thinned pathological bone, and even this is involved, but not as much as this bone. So we remove the whole posterior wall of the maxilla in order to gain exposure to the pterygopalatine fossa. This is the posterior post-antral tissue or retroantral tissue. Normally, we have a healthy fat here and the neurovascular bundle. This is the internal maxillary artery. Normally, this IMAX is very healthy and you can see pulsations clearly in this IMAX. But in this case, no, because the trait of the mucormycosis, which was already mentioned, is angio-invasive, and IMAX is one of the arteries which takes the first brunt of the disease. So this mucor has already invaded, and if you can see clearly, this is a necrotic tissue. Normally, we see healthy fat in this place, and this is necrotic tissue. And further, the dissection and removal of the unhealthy tissue from pterygopalatine fossa and infratemporal fossa is continued, and the whole tissue is removed until we can see the temporalis muscle laterally. In this patient, we dissected this whole tissue, we removed this whole tissue until the temporalis muscle was seen clearly. And then the patient is, this is the end view of the surgery, and the patient is put on antifungals, injectable antifungals later. Now we'll proceed with that surgery. I'll show a few steps of this surgery which might be useful for our ENT colleagues. Coming to the first part of the surgery, I've labeled 4 parts. So this is the initial diagnostic nasal endoscopy. See, in any other scenario, we'll take this, me as an ENT consultant, me as an ENT surgeon, will take it as a acute bacterial sinusitis or some fungal sinusitis. But in this scenario, see the consistency, change in consistency of the tissue here. If we are well versed with the cadaveric dissections, this is almost a cadaver sort of a tissue. See, this is the appearance in this. No classical black eschar-like presentation. And see, once we go to the nasopharynx, what we saw is a mucopurulent discharge. So never neglect a mucopurulent discharge not to be ascopic. Better take a swab, send it for KOH mount or fungal culture, and then evaluate. And one more important thing which I have forgotten earlier, mucormycosis in this scenario better be a clinical diagnosis, but it is more of a radiological diagnosis. You see a radiology, you study it properly, 99% you are bang on, it might be a correct diagnosis. Clinically, it might present at a later stage because most often it is not involving nose like this. This patient was very lucky, so because immediately after endoscopy he found it. But many a times this is not the usual presentation because every government regulations are in such a way that they need a KOH mount report or a culture report in order to apply for injections, because it has already been taken by the government and because of the good for the public. And a KOH mount report or a fungal culture report before starting the surgery will be very handy in getting the amphotericin injections or posaconazole injections or isobuconazole in any antifungal at the right time. Once you debride it, then you can start readily because you'll have a handy report. And it is more of a radiological diagnosis. You study the radiology properly, you can cleanse the diagnosis. This is the initial step. See the cadaveric tissue. Now we'll proceed to the next video where, see, this is how we expose the anterolateral wall. This is the pyriform aperture, and we keep a Frears elevator and expose the anterolateral part of the tissue, anterolateral wall of the maxilla. And once we have exposed it, what we'll do is we'll take a goose and hammer and then see the normally this bone is very hard. The normal healthy bone is very hard, but in this it is not hard. Once we hit with a goose and hammer, it gave away and we entered the maxillary sinus. See, this is how we entered the maxillary sinus. And next video is video 7. And this shows the exposure. Once the whole thing is removed, this is the approach which I have told. See, I could not edit it clearly because of the lack of time. This is the floor of the maxilla. This is the floor of the nasal cavity. This is the superior limit, which I have told the floor of the orbit, and this is the exposure for the posterior wall of the maxilla. This is the this is the unhealthy mucosa which has been infected by mucor. You have to remove completely so as to examine the underlying bone. Next, we'll proceed to the last part of this video. See, this is one important thing. What is the limit for your surgery? What is the end point of your surgery? Okay, laterally I've told the healthy temporalis muscle, but what medially? Medially, you should be able to see, this is where we are drilling is the anterior posterior wall of the maxilla and anterior pterygoid wedge of the sphenoid bone. We are drilling on that. So we encounter two important nerves here. One is the median nerve. The second thing is the maxillary nerve. V2 and median nerve. Starting somewhere. I have the image of it. If possible, I'll keep it. I'll take a picture of it and I'll keep it later. And the end point of the surgery, which we can clearly see is. Okay, in this patient, we also did a medial orbital decompression, medial orbitotomy, to examine what is the situation or the status of the fat medial to the periorbital, and this was healthy, and this might also facilitate in giving a retrobulbar injection at a later point of time, and for us to examine the status of the orbit also. And thus, I conclude my presentation. I thank one and all for giving me this opportunity. And Sudhakar sir, PV Sudhakar sir, any questions which we can take?
Yeah, thank you, Chanakya, for a nice presentation and showing so many pictures and videos. And there are a few questions that have come up, not exactly on your subject, but I wish to ask you a few questions.
Sure, sir, sure.
It has been said that endoscopic sinus surgery is done as long as the disease is restricted to the sinuses. As you know that this is an angio-invasive disease.
Yes, sir.
Thrombosis with overlying bone necrosis, in which case probably we'll have to open it up.
Yes, sir.
I'm sure you will agree with that.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and like Dr. Rohan has shown earlier, he has used a Weber-Ferguson approach to reach the maxilla and do the maxillectomy. I think after this endoscopic sinus surgery, once you feel that there is an overlying bone necrosis, perhaps an intra-oral approach or a sulcus incision would be a better option in order to preserve avoid the scarring over the face, even if it is like a lateral rhinotomy incision, and does better over a period of time. It's always better to do this way. Of course, a lot of other factors would dictate which approach needs to be taken. We cannot pinpoint that this particular approach is good for each and every case.
Yes,
That's a point that I want to make. The second one is that there was some on the chat box we can see some of the caution that has been given by the newspaper clippings over here. One says that the children are getting affected more and more, like there is 11 and 14-year-old kids who are affected in Karnataka, and so we should be very vigilant on this particular mucormycosis epidemic. And similarly, Dr. Butchraju has shared that maybe the nasal swabs that are used for testing be the carriers of this particular fungus. I think that also needs to be studied.
One point which I want to bring it to notice, sir, even without the nasal swab, these mucospores are everywhere. They are ubiquitous.
Yeah.
It need not be the swab which might take it and put it in the nose. They're always present. What actually didn't happen is normal immunity levels have not caused the infection to take the upper hand. But there is something which many of us are missing, or many of us are still to identify, which is the right reason or the correct reason for the mucor to grow in post-COVID or some people might not, who are not infected with COVID. What I have seen in my 50 case experience, which I have seen, is most commonly many of the patients, of over 90% of the people, have a bad glycemic control, very bad glycemic control. The first 3 cases which were operated had a HbA1c of 12.99, 13.22, and 11.84. And the average blood glucose levels were 325, 305, and 375 milligrams respectively. So this one point was one of the most consistent thing which I have seen in this small experience of mine, sir.
Okay. There is a question by Dr. Subramaniam. He says, does NO is helpful in prevention of COVID? What is that NO stand for?
Nitric oxide, sir, nitric oxide. There have been theories, or there is a spray which is almost at the release stage, I think, nitric oxide spray, which they say has 99% capacity to kill the mucor in the nose itself. But it is yet to be studied clinically. It is yet to release, and we have to still read about it once the product is out. Nitric oxide spray, which is about to be released in the market, sir.
Yeah. I mean, unless we have the blinded studies, unless we have the case control studies, it's very difficult to come to a conclusion.
Yes, sir.
Experiences will not be helpful when we speak in such a forum.
Every case is different, sir, because I have seen one patient who was COVID positive, and the initial MRI showed involvement of the anterior part of the cavernous sinus on one side. Because he was a COVID positive, our hospital had protocol did not let us operate on the patient. So I asked the patient to go to a higher center where COVID positive patients were being operated. I don't know what he thought, but he somehow got amphotericin lyophilized, not even liposomal, and he got it administered at his home with the help of some doctor. And he came back for 14 days, and the disease had not even progressed a single bit. It was at the same stage where it was earlier. There are many factors which we still need to understand in this, sir. But one thing which we readily say is, whenever you see a necrotic tissue which was affected by mucor, go and remove it, put him on antifungals as early as possible. This is one dictum which is good for everyone who has been infected. And there are n number of possibilities according to the individual body immunity and various other factors, sir.
Yeah. Okay, the point well taken. You know what? We all know that it is multifactorial. We cannot pinpoint at a single factor causing this particular problem, and lot more studies need to be done. And I am sure that each one of you, that you also please study the epidemiology of the number of cases that you do. Try to take a detailed history, take a detailed and document it so that it may be useful in future.
Yes, sir. Sure, sir.
Yeah. And do you have to say anything, Dr. Rohan or Dr. Rohan or Dr. Sundarachari, before we conclude? The final remarks of both of you before we conclude.
There is only hyperglycemia aggravated by steroid usage, sir, for the cause of this present epidemic mucormycosis. We have to focus on that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's always there. Yeah, that's always there. And if there are no further questions, I conclude this meeting here. And thank you very much for joining. And please do join us tomorrow as well. So we'll have one more session tomorrow. And this series of lectures and series of discussions on mucormycosis continue for the next 4 days. And tomorrow it's the medical management, which will be elaborated by Dr. Sudhakar along with his colleagues. And day after tomorrow it will be the surgery again. I will be coming back on the day of surgery, and we will be showing the interesting case scenarios and the operating photographs as well. With that note, I thank Dr. Vinod Kumar IAS for having given this opportunity to Andhra Medical College to conduct these proceedings, and I thank each one of you for having come forward to join this particular program, and please do join us tomorrow as well. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, sir. Good night.